Before I tell you about the dinner I wasn't invited to, I want you to understand something about my mother. She didn't hate me. That would have been simpler. You can build a life around someone who hates you. You can make clean decisions, clear exits, a whole architecture of self-protection. Hatred has edges. You know exactly where it begins and ends. Shame is different. Shame is ambient. It gets into everything. The way humidity does, you don't feel it as one thing. You just feel slightly heavier all the time. And after a while, you stop noticing the weight because you've recalibrated what normal feels like. My mother was ashamed of me. Not all of me, and not always, and not without love somewhere underneath it. But the shame was there. I learned to recognize it the way you learn to recognize weather, the particular stillness in the air, the slight shift in her posture, the way her eyes would do a quick inventory of me before we walked into a room full of people who mattered to her. I am 31 years old. I have known this for most of my life. What I have not always known is what to do with the knowing. The text arrived at 4:15 on a Saturday afternoon in October. I was in my office, which is not unusual for a Saturday, though I could hear the building's weekend quiet around me, the specific hum of an HVAC system with no one left to mask it. My laptop was open to a client proposal, a good one, the kind of work I find genuinely satisfying, which is not something I say about everything. My personal phone was on the desk beside me, face down. I do this when I need to concentrate. It's a habit I developed in my 20s that has since become something close to discipline. The phone stays down until the work earns a break. It buzzed once. The sound of it against the mahogany was different from a call. Softer. Text message. I turned it over. Mom. There are people who would have felt a flutter of anticipation at that, the reflex hope that every incoming message from a complicated parent might be the one that's different, that starts "I've been thinking about you," or "I'm proud of you," or even just "How are you doing?" Really. I had that reflex once. I don't anymore. What I have instead is a kind of preparedness. A small, quiet bracing. "Don't come tonight," she had written. "They're important people. You'll ruin everything." I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it the first time. I understood it perfectly on the first pass, the words, the logic, the specific hierarchy of priorities it revealed. I read it twice because I wanted to see if it would hurt differently the second time. It didn't. I thought for a moment about what to say back. I could have called her. I could have asked what exactly she meant by ruin, what category of ruination she was bracing herself for, whether it was the way I talk, or the questions I ask, or the particular stillness I carry in social situations that people sometimes read as coldness and is actually just concentration. I could have told her that I was, in fact, a functioning adult who had navigated rooms full of important people quite successfully for the better part of a decade, and that the disaster she was anticipating had a spotty track record of actually occurring. I could have said any of that. I typed 2 letters instead. Okay. Sent it. Put the phone back down, face down, and returned to the proposal. The cursor blinked. I found my place in the paragraph. I kept working. This is the part. I imagine some of you are thinking, where she cried. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you about that. Not because I need you to think I'm stronger than I am, but because the truth is more complicated than tears. And I'd rather give you the complicated version. What I did was finish the paragraph I was on, then the next one, and then I packed my laptop into its case and turned off the office lights, one by one, and rode the elevator down to the parking garage, and I sat in my car for approximately 45 seconds before starting the engine. 45 seconds. That was the whole of what I allowed it. Then I backed out of the space and drove north on Fayetteville Street toward home. It was a clear evening. October in Raleigh has a particular quality of light, slanted, gold, the kind that makes everything look slightly more deliberate than it is, as if the city has been lit for something. The dogwoods along the median had gone red early this year. I drive the same route every day. It takes 11 minutes without traffic and 17 with it. That evening it took 14, which is neither here nor there, except that I know the number because I counted the lights. I do that sometimes, when my mind needs something small and finite to hold on to. My mother had been engaged to Dale Calloway for 7 months. I had not met him. I knew his first name because she'd mentioned it twice, once in passing, once in a voicemail she left in August that I'd listened to 4 days after she'd sent it. I knew he was retired military, that he had a son from a previous marriage, and that he lived somewhere in Chapel Hill. I knew that tonight was the first time she was introducing him to important people her word, a category that had never, in my experience, included me. The drive continued. The light changed. I thought about the proposal I'd be returning to after dinner. There was a structural issue in Section 3 that I'd been circling for 2 days, and I had an idea now about how to fix it. My work phone buzzed in the cup holder. An email, the preview showing only a name and a subject line. R. Calloway, VP Operations Q3 Variance Report attached. I made a note to review it in the morning and set the phone back down. I made pasta that night. Garlic and olive oil, nothing complicated. I ate it on the couch and watched something I don't remember now and went to bed at 10:45, which is when I usually go to bed. The dinner started at 7:30. By 8:25, someone's phone was going to ring, and what happened next had nothing to do with anything I planned and everything to do with everything I had built, but I didn't know that yet. My apartment is on the 14th floor of a building that went up 6 years ago, when downtown Raleigh was still deciding what it wanted to be. I chose it for the windows. Floor to ceiling on the east wall, the kind that make the light feel like a decision instead of an accident. On clear October evenings, the whole city goes amber at exactly the right angle, and the buildings across the way hold the color for about 20 minutes before the sky changes its mind and lets the dark in. I didn't look at the light that evening. I was in the kitchen with the overhead on, mincing garlic. There is something about garlic hitting olive oil in a hot pan that I find genuinely calming, the sound more than the smell, the immediate sizzle and the way it demands attention without requiring thought. I turned the heat down slightly, added a pinch of red pepper flake, waited. The kitchen is small enough that the warmth from the stove reaches the counter in under a minute, and I had my sleeves pushed up and my jacket over the back of a chair, and the whole evening had the feel of something manageable. Small. Mine. My work phone was on the counter beside the cutting board. An email from Robert Calloway had come in while I was driving. The subject line said Q3 Variance Report, attached, and I had read it, made a mental note to address it Monday morning, and set the phone back down without opening the attachment. My personal phone was in my jacket pocket. It would stay there. I hadn't told my mother about the company, not the name of it, not the size of it, or the client list, or the scope of what it had taken to build the years of 70-hour weeks, the 2 rounds of credit card debt that preceded the funding, the 6 months I spent wondering every Sunday night whether I had made a catastrophic error in judgment. She knew I worked in consulting. I had said those words once, several years ago, and she had nodded in the particular way of someone filing information they don't expect to need again, and I had not gone back to correct the picture. I told myself, when I thought about it, that this was because she wouldn't understand what management consulting actually meant, which is true in the limited sense that most people don't. It is a phrase that explains nothing while sounding like it explains everything, a description that closes down questions rather than opening them. But if I'm being precise about it, and I tend to be, that explanation is incomplete. The fuller version, I didn't want to hand her something real and watch her decide whether it was enough. The pasta water came to a boil. I dropped the linguine in and set the timer for 9 minutes and leaned against the counter with my arms crossed, not thinking about anything in particular, which is its own kind of rest. The smell of the garlic, or the steam coming off the pot, or the particular warmth of the kitchen at that hour, I don't know which of those things opened the door. But I was standing there and then I wasn't, not entirely. Part of me slipped back. 17 years, 40 miles south, the back seat of my mother's car. I was 14. She had taken me to a dinner party at the Hendersons' house. Her boyfriend at the time had a business connection there, And this was one of those evenings where the right people and the right impression mattered in ways I was only beginning to understand. She had told me twice before we left to wear something understated. I wore the dress I loved most, blue with a lace trim along the hem, chosen with the specific confidence of a 14-year-old who had not yet learned to dress for other people's comfort. I talked to people at the party. That's what I do. I found a woman named Carol with strong views on the county school board, and I asked her to explain them, which she did for 11 minutes while I listened with genuine interest. I spoke to a man just back from Lisbon who was visibly surprised I knew anything about Lisbon, and I knew a few things because I had read. There was a girl my age reading the same novel I had at home on my nightstand, and we argued about the ending productively. I thought, the kind of argument where both people leave with something? I walked away from that conversation feeling like something real had occurred. On the drive home, my mother didn't speak for 20 minutes. I watched the streetlights pass the window in their steady rhythm and waited. I was still half thinking about the book argument, working out a point I wished I'd made more cleanly. Then she said, "Why do you always have to do that?" I asked what she meant. "Talk like that," she said. "Act like that." They were looking at us, Claire. The whole room. I went back through the evening the way you audit a column of numbers when someone tells you the total is wrong methodically, looking for the error. I had been polite. I had asked questions more than I had held the floor. I had not embarrassed anyone that I could identify. The error was not locatable. I didn't know I was doing anything wrong, I said. She didn't answer. The car moved through the dark. The streetlights kept coming and going. That silence was the real verdict. Not anything she said, the silence. She had a name for what I'd done, something specific enough to produce those words in that order, but she chose not to say it aloud, which meant I couldn't argue against it, which meant I had no way to fix what I still don't know I broke. I put the dress in the back of my closet that night. Sometime the following year, I gave it to Goodwill. I don't remember making a decision about it. I just remember that one day it was gone and I realized I hadn't looked for it. The timer went off. I drained the pasta, tossed it with the oil and garlic and parmesan and some parsley that needed to be used, carried the bowl to the couch, sat down, turned on the television. Something played, one of those programs where people make decisions and the consequences resolve in under an hour. I found it restful. I ate. I rinsed the bowl and left it in the sink. At some point, I pulled my work phone off the counter and skimmed the rest of my inbox. Nothing urgent. A calendar reminder. A note from a junior consultant. The Callaway variance report that I opened briefly before closing it could wait until Monday. I set the phone down. The city outside my windows had gone fully dark in the ordinary way, the skyline lit in the uneven way of a place still figuring itself out. Construction cranes blinking red, the interstate running a slow line of headlights south. 40 miles from where I was sitting, my mother was at a restaurant called Heron's, which I knew of but had never been to, having dinner with a man named Dale Calloway and his parents, in an evening she had planned carefully enough to leave me out of entirely. She was right that I wasn't there. What she hadn't considered was the phone sitting in Robert Calloway's jacket pocket and the call that was going to come through it before the dessert menus arrived. I wasn't there. I want to be clear about that before I tell you what happened, because the version I'm giving you is reconstructed assembled afterward from two separate conversations, a few details my mother eventually provided without meaning to, and a reasonable knowledge of how she behaves when she has decided that an evening matters. What I know for certain is this. The restaurant was Heron's at the Umstead, which is in Cary, about 20 minutes from downtown. It's the kind of place where the parking attendant greets you by your reservation name and the menu changes with the season. My mother had chosen it, which told me something about how much she wanted this to go well. She doesn't spend money on restaurants unless the occasion justifies the expense. This occasion apparently did. She arrived at 7:20, 10 minutes early. I know this because arriving early to a dinner you've arranged is how you establish that you're the person who sets the tone for the evening. And my mother has always understood that instinctively, the way some people understand weather or music, not through analysis, but through a long history of needing to. She would have checked the table, straightened something, a candle, a fork, a water glass that didn't need straightening. She would have ordered water and declined a cocktail because she doesn't drink before the guests arrive. She would have looked at the door each time it opened. Dale Calloway came in at 7:26, with his parents just behind him. Robert and Beverly. Robert was 61, a compact, deliberate man with the posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture mattered. Beverly was a few years younger and moved through the restaurant with the ease of someone who has been to enough of these places that they no longer impress her. Dale, I would meet him by phone later and form a sense of him from that was her son in mannerism, if not in face. Careful, measured, not unkind. My mother would have been at her best in those first 15 minutes. That's when she's most fluent, the initial impression, the handshake, the first exchange of pleasantries where she locates what each person takes pride in and mentions it. She's genuinely good at this. I don't say that grudgingly. It is a real skill, the ability to make people feel immediately known, and she has it. Beverly asked about her work. My mother talked about the county office 22 years, the relationships you build over that kind of time, the satisfaction of useful work done consistently. She made it sound like enough, which it is. Robert asked where she had grown up. She said Western North Carolina, which is true, and left it there, which is a choice. Then Beverly asked whether she had children. The way Robert later described this moment to me, not unkindly, just precisely, was that something in the table shifted, not dramatically. Just a small adjustment, the way a room recalibrates when someone opens a window and the air changes. My mother said, one daughter, she's in consulting, travels a lot. Not, my daughter runs a management consulting firm downtown. Not, my daughter built something, if you want to know. Not even, her name is Claire. Just the function and the frequency. Consulting travels, the two facts least likely to require a follow-up question. Beverly nodded pleasantly, and the conversation moved to Dale's time in Germany, which is where the army had stationed him for 3 years in his 40s, and the subject of me was closed as quietly and cleanly as it had opened. The bread arrived. Robert took 3 pieces. Beverly said his name in the particular way of a spouse who has made this observation many times before. He said it was good bread, which it was, and took a 4th piece slightly smaller than the others, as a compromise. The wine was poured. The first courses came. My mother held her posture the way she always does when she's working at something straight, shoulders back, the performance requiring a kind of muscular attention she would only notice later, when she was home and her neck was sore. She was good at this. The conversation moved well. She made Beverly laugh twice genuinely, not the polite kind, and asked Robert about a project he'd mentioned, and listened to his answer the way people listen when they've remembered to care. What she did not know, could not have known, was that Robert Calloway was someone who noticed things. Not emotionally, he wasn't that kind of person. Observationally, the way certain people with certain careers learn to process environments rather than just inhabit them. He had spent 30 years in operations, which is the practice of finding where the system doesn't match the plan, and it leaves marks on how you pay attention. He had heard the word consulting and filed it. He had noticed the pause before it's small, barely there, but present. He had noticed that Beverly's follow-up question, which would have been the natural one, was gently rerouted before she could ask it. He filed that too. He was not suspicious. He was simply careful with information, in the way of someone for whom accuracy has professional value. The main course arrived. Shrimp and something seasonal, according to Dale. The conversation had settled into the comfortable middle of a dinner that is going as planned, not electric, not strained, just good enough to justify the reservation. My mother reached for her wine and permitted herself something close to relief. 40 minutes in, the shrimp was being cleared. Someone was considering the dessert menu. Robert's phone, which was on the table beside his water glass, lit up. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, local area code, but not stored in his contacts. A work number, he would tell me later. He could tell by the way it rang. His personal phone had a different tone. He excused himself, folded his napkin, pushed back his chair with the unhurried movement of a man who does not treat minor interruptions as emergencies. My mother watched him go with the mild irritation of someone who has choreographed an evening and would prefer all the dancers to stay on their marks. She picked up her wine, turned back to Beverly, started a sentence about something, a garden, a renovation. I don't know. 3 minutes passed. Robert came back through the restaurant, the way people come back when they have received information that hasn't finished arriving yet, present in body, somewhere else in the processing of it. He sat down, set his phone face down on the table beside the water glass, rested his hands flat on the white cloth. He looked at my mother. He asked her a question that required only 3 words and my name. The parking lot outside Heron's is lit the way upscale restaurants light their parking lots, enough to see clearly, not enough to feel exposed. Landscape lighting along the hedges, a few coach lanterns at the entrance. Robert stood about 30 feet from the front door, his phone to his ear, and the October air had enough of a chill that he could see his breath in the light if he looked for it. He wasn't looking for it, he was listening. The number on his screen was the main line for Meridian Consulting, a number he knew, had called himself, had given to clients when they needed a direct channel. It was not a number that typically rang his personal cell. It rang the front desk, or the department extensions, or the on-call line he shared with 2 other VPs when there was something that couldn't wait until Monday. That it had found his personal number on a Saturday evening meant someone had gone looking for it specifically, he answered. A woman's voice, professional, unhurried. She was calling on behalf of Miss Weston regarding the Goldman timeline, and she apologized for the weekend intrusion, and she would keep it brief. Robert said that was fine. He said he'd have the updated numbers to her by 7 a.m. Monday. Then he asked, as naturally as he could manage given the thing that had started happening in his chest, a kind of still, careful alertness. Like a system running a diagnostic, he asked whether Miss Weston's first name was Claire. A pause on the other end, small but present. Yes, the woman said. Claire Weston. Is everything all right? Robert said everything was fine. He thanked her. He ended the call. He stood in the parking lot for 2 minutes and did not move, which is not a thing Robert Calloway does. He is a man who moves through space with intention, deliberate, efficient, without excess. 2 minutes of standing still in a parking lot with his phone in his hand was, for him, the equivalent of another man sitting down on the curb and putting his head between his knees. He was thinking about a name. He was thinking about the fact that Sandra Weston Pierce, who was sitting inside at a table he had agreed to attend as a gesture of goodwill toward his son, shared a last name with his CEO. He was thinking about the word consulting and the slight pause before it, and Beverly's follow-up question that had been rerouted before she could finish asking it. He was thinking about 42 employees and a woman he had worked for, and respected, and whose last name he had never once thought to connect to anyone in his personal life, because why would he? He was thinking about the fact that he had been at this dinner for 40 minutes and no one had mentioned any of this. He went back inside. He walked through the restaurant the way people walk when they are maintaining composure, as a deliberate act, measured steps, a neutral face, the particular discipline of someone who learned a long time ago that you do not let a room know what you're carrying until you've decided what to do with it. He reached the table. He sat down. He set his phone face down on the white cloth beside his water glass and rested both hands flat on the table and looked at my mother. Sandra, he said, your daughter's name is Claire? My mother said yes. Claire Weston? She said that's right. And something in her face shifted, not alarm yet, just the first sensing of a change in air pressure, the way animals go quiet before weather arrives. She works in management consulting? Yes, my mother said. Why? Robert's hand stayed flat on the table. When he spoke, his voice was the same volume it had been all evening. He did not perform this. That was the thing about Robert, that I understood later. He was not built for performance. He was built for accuracy. She's my boss, he said. She runs the company I work for. I've worked for her for 3 years. The fork in my mother's hand touched the plate. Not dropped, touched, with a small sound, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence no one had intended to write. Beverly looked at Robert. Dale looked at my mother. My mother looked at Robert. And for a moment, the expression on her face was one I recognized from the handful of times I've managed to truly surprise her, not the social version of surprise, the performed one, but the real kind, where the processing happens visibly because there's no time to hide it. It is an expression that makes her look younger. It does not last long. That's not possible, she said, not unkindly, just as a statement about reality, the way you'd say it to a map that appears to show you somewhere you can't be. I'm afraid it is, Robert said. A silence moved through the table. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that has volume, that fills the space between people and makes everyone acutely aware of the specific chair they are sitting in. My mother is very good at recovering. I have watched her recover from bad moments in public for most of my life, the small recalibrations, the pivot to a new subject, the smile that arrives half a beat after it should but arrives nonetheless. She tried. She said something about what a small world. And isn't that funny? And she may even have laughed the version of a laugh that is mostly breath. Beverly smiled the careful smile of a woman who is watching a situation and has not yet decided what she thinks of it. Dale said nothing. He was looking at the tablecloth in the particular way of someone who has just added a piece of information to a set and is quietly revising his conclusions about the whole. Robert picked up his water glass, drank, set it down. The evening continued in the way of things that continue, because no one has yet decided how to stop them. Dessert menus appeared. A waiter came and went, and my mother steered the conversation with everything she had, which is considerable, and the table let her, which is its own kind of answer. I don't know what my mother was thinking in those minutes. I know what she did, which was what she always does. She managed. She held the surface of the evening together with both hands, and she smiled, and she spoke, and she got through it. That is not a small thing. I want to be fair about that. It is not a small thing to manage a situation in real time when something large and irreversible has just occurred, and she did it. But something had shifted at that table that no amount of managing was going to unshift. 40 miles north, on my couch, my personal phone lit up. I had retrieved it from my jacket pocket at some point, I don't remember exactly when, and left it on the cushion beside me. The screen showed my mother's name. I looked at it. The program on the television made a sound. Someone had made a decision, and the consequences were unfolding, as they do. My phone rang twice more, then stopped. I set it face down on the cushion, the way I set things when I am not yet ready to know what they contain. Then the text started. The first text arrived at 8:32. I know the timestamp because I looked at it later, when I was reconstructing the evening in the way I reconstruct things systematically, with attention to sequence. At the time, I heard the buzz, and I looked at the screen and I saw my mother's name, and I put the phone back down. I had some vague idea that I would deal with it in a moment. After whatever was happening on the television resolved itself, the program had moved into its final act. Someone was going to make a decision. The second text arrived 40 seconds after the first. The third came 2 minutes after that. By the fourth, I understood that this was not going to pause for the program. I picked up the phone. She had sent 7 messages in 4 minutes, and the remaining 4 came in while I was reading the first 7, which meant that by the time I had gone through all of them, which took perhaps 90 seconds, sitting on my couch with the television's light moving across my hands, she had completed, in writing, an entire arc of human emotion that most people would need a week and a therapist to get through. I will give them to you in order. Why didn't you ever tell me? This is your fault for not being clearer about your work. You did this on purpose, didn't you? I am so embarrassed I could die. Robert is being very understanding, actually. Dale is quiet, but he'll come around. I always knew you would be successful. I just didn't know how successful. I tell people about you all the time. Can you please call me back? This is a family emergency. Fine, don't call. Is Robert Calloway single? Asking for a friend? I read the last one 3 times. Once to confirm I had understood it correctly. Once because I hadn't. Once because I had. My mother, in the span of 8 minutes, had moved from accusation to blame to conspiracy to catastrophe to damage control to revisionist pride to social networking. She had covered more emotional ground in a single text thread than most people manage in a calendar year. And she had genuinely ended, with what I can only assume she believed was a light touch by asking whether the 61-year-old father of her now former fiancé was available for a date. I set the phone down on the cushion beside me. The program on the television had resolved itself. Someone had made the decision and the consequences had arrived, and the music indicated that this was the appropriate emotional response to have. I turned the television off. The apartment went quiet in the specific way. Apartments go quiet after a television has been on, not silence exactly, but the sudden awareness of all the small sounds that were there all along. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing 17 stories down, the ventilation system doing what it does. I did not respond to any of the texts, not because I was planning something, and not as a strategy. I simply did not have anything to say that would have been useful or true, and I have a long-standing policy against saying things that are neither. She called twice more before midnight. I watched the phone light up and go dark, and light up and go dark, and each time I thought about picking it up and each time I didn't, and at some point I realized the thought and the decision were happening so close together that they were almost the same thing. I turned off the lamp on the side table. The room went dark except for the skyline through the east windows, the city's particular version of dark, which is not very dark at all, orange and amber, and the blinking red of the cranes. I lay back on the couch. The phone was on my chest, face up, and I could feel each time it stopped buzzing the specific absence of it, the way you notice silence more than sound. Around 11:15, I picked it up to check the time and the screen lit. And for a moment before it showed me anything, I was just looking at my own face in the black mirror of it. The kind of thing that happens when you forget what you were reaching for, you pick up the phone, and instead of what you were looking for, you find yourself dimly lit, slightly surprised. I looked older than I expected. Not old, just more settled into whatever I've become. The way a landscape looks different in low light than it does in the afternoon. There were things in my face I recognized, and things I had stopped noticing because you stop noticing your own face when you see it every day. I held the phone and looked at it for longer than I meant to. There is a question I carry around. Most people have a question about themselves that they've gotten so used to not answering that they stop recognizing it as a question and start experiencing it as weather, as a condition of being alive. Mine is, who are you being right now, Claire? Not who are you. I know who I am with reasonable confidence and have for some time. But who I am and who I am being are occasionally different things. And the gap between them, when I notice it, is where most of my real work happens. I was being someone who had received 11 texts from her mother and had not responded to a single one. I was being someone who had let the phone ring and go dark twice and had not moved. I was being someone who was lying in her own apartment on a Saturday night, looking at her own face in the dark, and not feeling what she expected to feel, which was satisfaction or relief, or the clean, bright clarity of an outcome that had resolved correctly. What I felt was something harder to name than any of those things. Something with the texture of an old scar, not painful, not gone, just permanently there, slightly different from the skin around it. I put the phone face down on the cushion. I did not answer either question that night, the one about who I was being, or the quieter one underneath it, about whether any of this was going to matter in a year. I filed them both in the place where I file things I'm not ready to address, which is organized if not resolved, and I went to bed at 12:47, which is later than I usually go to bed. I slept without difficulty. That, too, is something I do not feel entirely good about. Monday morning, I drove to the office and found out that Diane had been the one to make the call. Diane Chen has worked with me for 4 years. She arrived at Meridian 8 months after I founded it, in response to a job posting I had written at 2 in the morning, and which apparently read, according to her at the interview, like it had been written by someone who needed help but was not entirely comfortable asking for it. She said this was the reason she applied. I hired her the same week. She is not a person who dramatizes things. This is one of her most useful qualities and also, occasionally, a source of difficulty because it means that when she tells you something significant, she tells it to you in exactly the same tone she uses for everything else, and you have to calibrate the significance yourself. Monday morning, I came in at 7:40. She was already at her desk. The coffee was made. I poured a cup and went to my office and reviewed the Goldman deck for 20 minutes, and then I came back out. "Diane," I said, "did you call Robert Calloway on Saturday night?" She looked up from her monitor. "The Goldman timeline." "Yes. Is something wrong?" I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which is another of her qualities I value. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "So his son is your mother's fiancé?" "Was," I said. "Probably." She nodded. She looked at her monitor. She looked back at me. "I thought you said his name was Gerald." "I never said Gerald. I've been picturing Gerald since Saturday night. I had a whole sense of him. There is no Gerald. There's a Gerald in logistics. That Gerald is not relevant to this situation. Gerald in logistics complains about the coffee." She said this with the specific gravity of a person sharing material evidence. I thought that was interesting. Given the connection, I looked at her for a moment. "I'll buy Gerald better coffee," I said. "Can we move on?" She said yes, and pulled up her notes, and we moved on. And that was the entirety of the Gerald conversation, except that I thought about it twice more during the day, in the involuntary way you think about something that landed correctly, which is its own kind of relief when the rest of what you're carrying is heavier. Robert arrived at 9:25. He stopped at Diane's desk first, which he does not usually do, and I saw through the glass of my office that they exchanged a brief conversation, Diane nodding, Robert's posture carrying the particular stiffness of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say and is not confident in the rehearsal. He knocked on my open door. "Do you have a few minutes?" he said. I told him I did and gestured to the chair across from my desk, and he sat down in it with the careful deliberateness of a man who is aware that he is in a professional space conducting what is not, at its core, a professional conversation. "Miss Weston," he started, "I want to say regarding Saturday evening, the situation that came to light was not something I wasn't aware of the family connection, and I want you to know that I handled it as professionally as I could under the circumstances, and that nothing that occurred will affect my commitment to Robert." He stopped. "Your performance record stands on its own. What happened Saturday has no bearing on your position here." He exhaled. Not dramatically, just the specific exhale of someone who had been holding something for 2 days and has now been told they can put it down. "That's very professional of you," he said. "It's just accurate." He nodded. He straightened slightly in the chair, which meant the thing he'd rehearsed was done and he was operating without a script, which for Robert produces a brief visible recalibration. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at me. "The shrimp was very good," he said. "At Heron's, if that's of any use." "I've heard good things about it," I said. He stood up. He was almost to the door when he stopped. Not dramatically, just the stop of someone who has remembered a detail they had not initially planned to share, and is deciding in real time whether it matters. "She described you," he said. When Beverly asked if she had children, "I don't know if you want to know this," I told him he could tell me. She said, "One daughter, she's in consulting, travels a lot." He said it neutrally, in the tone of a man quoting a source precisely. Beverly was going to ask a follow-up. The subject changed before she could. I looked at him. "Thank you, Robert," I said. "Close the door on your way out." He did. I sat at my desk for a moment with my coffee, and I did not do anything in particular. The city was audible through the glass in the muted way of a Monday, the lower frequencies, the background hum of a week beginning. On my desk there was the Goldman deck and 3 other open files and a yellow legal pad with a list I had started that morning. None of it required my attention in that specific moment. She travels a lot, not what I do, not what I have built, not a name, not a title, not even the name of the city where I do it. Just the movement, the fact of being away, the inconvenience of the absence, as if the most informative thing about me, the thing most worth passing on to a table full of strangers, was that I was frequently somewhere else. I wrote 2 sentences on the legal pad. Then I moved on, which is what I do. At 11:15, an unfamiliar number called my cell. I answered because I answer unfamiliar numbers. You never know which one matters. It was Dale. His voice was the voice I had assembled from everything Robert and other people would eventually tell me: measured, deliberate, the particular cadence of someone who has learned to think before speaking and has been doing it for long enough that it no longer costs them anything. He introduced himself. He said he hoped I didn't mind the call. I said I didn't. He said he was trying to understand some things, and that he was not calling to cause difficulty, and that nothing that had happened was something he held against me. I said I appreciated that. I'm trying to understand why your mother wouldn't have wanted you at the dinner, he said. I considered how much of the truth to give him. Then I decided that the truth was the only currency that was going to be worth anything in this conversation. She texted me Saturday afternoon, I said. She told me not to come, that I'd embarrass her. A silence on his end. Not a processing silence, a deciding one. I've learned to tell the difference. She didn't tell me she'd done that, he said. I didn't expect her to. He thanked me for my time. He said he hoped things would work out, which is what people say when they have already reached a conclusion and are being generous about it. We ended the call. 48 hours later, Dale Calloway ended the engagement. He didn't tell me directly. He didn't owe me that. I heard it from my mother when she finally called, and I finally picked up. She called on a Thursday evening, 4 days after the dinner. I was home when it happened, jacket off, shoes off, the particular state of a weeknight after a long day, where you have not yet decided what to do with the next few hours. My personal phone was on the kitchen counter. When it lit up with her name, I looked at it for one full ring. Then I picked it up. She started talking before I finished saying hello. I let her go. This is something I learned years ago, that with my mother, the first several minutes of a difficult conversation are less a dialogue than a release of pressure, and that trying to speak into that initial surge produces nothing useful for either of us. So I leaned against the counter and listened and let her go. She said, how could I not have told her? She said she had been with Dale for 7 months and this was a serious relationship, and I had let her walk into that dinner without any warning. She said she'd been humiliated, which was true. She said this was my fault for not being clearer about my work, which was partly true in a way she didn't mean. She said a few other things that were variations on those things, and her voice had the specific quality it gets when she's crying and trying not to compress, working harder than it should on the ordinary business of making words. I waited until she stopped. What would you have liked me to warn you about, Mom? I said. That Robert worked for me? Yes. I've run that company for 4 years. I've been in consulting for 8. I kept my voice even, not deliberately calm, just even, the way it gets when I'm being precise. You've never once asked me who works for me, or what the company is called, or how many people depend on it. Not once. I knew you did consulting. You told Beverly I travel a lot for work. A silence. Short, but complete. That's how you described me, I said. Not what I do, not what I've built, just that I'm away a lot. I didn't mean, I have 42 employees, Mom. I have a 5-story office on Fayetteville Street. I have a client in Tokyo and a board meeting in February and a keynote at a conference in the spring. I paused, not for effect, because the next part required accuracy. And when someone asked you about your daughter, you said, she travels. I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this kind of story is supposed to go: the accumulated grievance, the years of smallness, the moment it all comes out in one overwhelming rush. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and I think more final. I lowered my voice, if anything. Each sentence was the same volume as the one before it. I was not trying to wound her. I was trying to be accurate, and accuracy was doing the wounding on its own. I don't know what you wanted me to be, I said. I don't know what version of me you could have brought to that table and not been ashamed of, but I'm starting to think it was never really about me at all. She was crying by then. I could hear it in the fractured way her breathing was moving. The way silence in a phone call has a different texture when the person on the other end is working to hold something back. I know, she said. Not, you're right. Not, I'm sorry. Just those two words, with nothing attached to them. I had prepared myself for the conversation I expected, the defense, the counter-accusation, the long-practiced pivot to everything she had sacrificed and everything she had tried and how hard things had been. I had prepared myself for the version of my mother I knew how to argue with. I had not prepared myself for "I know," said the way you say something you have known for a long time and are only now saying out loud for the first time, without performance, without strategy, because you have run out of both. It landed differently than I expected. Not softly, there was nothing soft about any of it. But differently, like something that had been pressing against a wall, finally finding the exact spot where the wall gave way. I'll call you in a few weeks, Mom, I said. She didn't say okay. She didn't say anything. The line was quiet, and I let it be quiet for a moment, and then I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a little while afterward. The refrigerator hummed. The city was doing its evening thing outside the windows, the specific density of light that falls on a city at 7 p.m. in October, when the sky has gone dark blue and hasn't reached black yet, and everything is slightly more vivid than it will be in another hour. Then I made dinner. That, too, is true. What happened over the following 2 weeks, I was not responsible for in any direct sense. I did not call anyone. I did not send anything. I did not correct or deny or amplify. What happened was that my mother, attempting to explain the situation to the people in her life who needed explaining to, and there were several, because she is a social person, and social people have social obligations, found that there was no version of the story that put her in a position she was comfortable with. She tried 4 different framings. I know this because she told me later, in the way she sometimes tells me things now, without packaging them first. Every framing arrived at the same place. A woman who had texted her daughter not to come to dinner because she'd be an embarrassment, and whose daughter had turned out to be the CEO of her fiancé's father's company. The story had a shape. The shape was not flattering. And once it has a shape, a story in a community like hers moves the way water does. It finds every available channel. By the end of the second week, the county office had heard something. The garden club had heard something more specific. Her church had its own version, which had acquired several details that she assured me were not accurate, and which I did not ask her to identify. I did not correct any of these versions. I want to be honest about that. Not because I was engineering a particular outcome, but because the truth was already in circulation and I had no interest in the work of softening it. That is not something I'm particularly proud of, but it's true. And I'd rather give you the truth than a more flattering account of my own behavior. I felt, when I allowed myself to examine it, complicated. People sometimes ask whether I feel bad about what happened to her. I tell them the same thing I'm telling you. I feel complicated. There's a version of what occurred that is clean and satisfying. The woman who excluded her daughter was excluded by the consequences of that choice, and justice moved through the world the way it's supposed to. I understand that version. Some days I believe it, but there's another version, quieter and less convenient, in which a 57-year-old woman who has spent her entire life performing confidence she doesn't have and chasing approval she couldn't name, lost something that mattered to her, in public, in a way she couldn't control. And that version makes the first one more complicated, not less true, but harder to hold cleanly. I was in my office on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the dinner, when I let myself think about it clearly for the first time. The city was below me the way it always is. The Goldman deck was done. The board meeting was calendared. 42 people had been paid that morning and would be paid again in 2 weeks, and the operation of all of it would continue, because the systems were sound and the people were good, and none of it required my mother to have seen any of it for it to be real. I looked at the skyline for a while. The universe has excellent timing, I thought. I had nothing to do with that timing. I had only lived my life, built something, sent 2 words on a Saturday afternoon, and gone home to make pasta. And still, here we were. 6 weeks later, my mother called and asked if we could get coffee. I said yes. Jubala Coffee is on P Street, which is a name I have always appreciated for a street. It is the kind of place that has been there long enough to have regulars who feel proprietary about their usual table, and wood floors that have gone soft in the traffic lanes, and a chalkboard above the counter with the day's offerings written in a hand that clearly belongs to the same person every morning. I go there sometimes when I need to be somewhere that is neither my office nor my apartment, a third kind of place, with no particular associations. I chose it for this reason. My mother was already there when I arrived. I saw her through the window before I went in. She was at a table near the back, her coat folded over the chair beside her, both hands around a ceramic mug. She was looking at the table. Not her phone, not the room, the table. She had the look of someone who prepared something on the way over and has already begun to suspect it won't be useful. I went in. The bell above the door made its small sound. She looked up. Something moved across her face, relief, maybe, or the particular expression that arrives when you've been waiting for something difficult and it has finally arrived and the waiting is at least over. She looked older than she had the last time I saw her, which was in March, at a lunch she'd organized to tell me about Dale. She also looked, for the first time in recent memory, like she was not performing anything. That was the difference. She was just sitting there in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, looking like a woman who had been carrying something heavy for 6 weeks and had not found a way to set it down. I ordered at the counter. I carried my coffee to the table and sat across from her. She had prepared something. I could tell by the way she straightened slightly when I sat down, a small internal gathering, the first breath before a rehearsed thing. But then she looked at me, and whatever she had prepared didn't come. She just said, "I don't know where to start." "You don't have to start anywhere in particular," I said. She looked at her coffee. She turned the mug in her hands once, slowly, and then she said, "I don't know why I do what I do. I've thought about it every day for 6 weeks. I've been through it more times than I can count, and I still don't have a clean answer for you. I'm not looking for a clean answer." "I was afraid," she said, "of what they would think, of what it would look like." She paused. "That's not an excuse." "I know it isn't." "No," I said, "it isn't." She nodded. She had expected that. What she hadn't expected, I think, was that I wasn't going to add to it, that I would let it stand on its own without pressing further. She looked at the table again, and then she said something I had not heard her say in 31 years of being her daughter. She said it the way you say something that has been stored in a place you don't normally open, not easily but not as hard as you thought, once you actually tried. "I grew up having lunch for free at school," she said. "Did you know that?" I told her I hadn't known, that she had never told me. "I never told you a lot of things." She was quiet for a moment. My mother cleaned hotel rooms, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She never complained, not once, not in front of me. But I watched people look through her, like she wasn't there, like she was part of the furniture. She set the mug down. I swore that nobody was ever going to look through me like that, or through anyone with my name. The coffee shop moved around us the way coffee shops move on Saturday mornings, unhurried. A little noisy. A table of women laughing about something near the window. The ordinary machinery of a day that didn't know it was significant to anyone. "I understand that," I said. "I do." She looked at me. "What I don't understand," I said, "is how that becomes, 'Don't come tonight.'" She didn't answer right away. I didn't fill the silence. "I know," she said finally. I couldn't separate them. You and where we came from. I couldn't see you without seeing all of it, and I didn't know how to explain that, and so I just..." She stopped. I made it smaller instead. I sat with that for a moment. "Neither did I said. She looked at me again, uncertain. "I never told you about the company. Not because you didn't ask, you didn't. But I also never offered. I kept my voice level, not because I wasn't feeling anything, But because what I was feeling was complicated enough, that level was the only register I had for it. I told myself it was because you wouldn't understand, or wouldn't care. But if I'm honest, it was because I didn't want to watch you receive it and find it not enough. So I kept it from you, and I told myself that was your fault, and it wasn't entirely. She was looking at me the way she looked at me sometimes when I was young, the version of her attention that didn't come with assessment attached to it. That was just looking. I had never known what to do with that version. I still don't, entirely. I am, she said. What? Impressed. She said it simply, without preamble. I have been for a long time. I didn't know how to say it in a way that would reach you. And then I stopped trying, which was the wrong thing. I looked at my coffee. I know, I said. We sat with that for a while. The women near the window laughed again about something. The barista called a name I didn't catch. Outside, P Street was doing what P Street does on a Saturday, moving slowly, unhurried. Mostly people walking dogs, or carrying groceries, or going somewhere that didn't require urgency. I think I'd like to try having coffee more often, I said. If you want that. I want that, she said. She didn't cry, neither did I. That was, as far as I could tell, a first. I paid at the counter on the way out. My mother waited for me near the door, and we walked out together and stood for a moment on the sidewalk in the October light. And then she went to her car and I went to mine, and neither of us said anything that needed to be said because we had just said the things that did. My work phone buzzed in my coat pocket before I reached my car. I read the email walking. I answered it in 4 sentences before I got to the door, a client question. Nothing complicated, handled. I got in, started the engine. When I came in Monday morning, Diane was at her desk with the coffee already made. She looked up and said, without any particular ceremony, "How was it?" "Complicated," I said. "Good complicated or bad complicated?" I thought about it. The coffee was good, the day was beginning, 42 people were at their desks or on their way to them, and there was work to do, and the world had not resolved itself into anything clean or simple, and I did not expect it to. "Good, I think," I said. "Give it time." She handed me a coffee. I went to work. There's something in Claire's story that goes beyond the dinner, beyond the phone call, beyond even the satisfaction of watching the truth arrive on its own schedule. It's the thing she admits quietly, almost in passing. She had kept herself hidden from her mother for years, not because her mother didn't deserve to see her, but because she was afraid of what it would look like if she showed her everything she'd built, and her mother still wasn't impressed. That fear, the fear of being truly seen and still found lacking, is one of the most human things there is, and it costs us more than we realize, because when we protect ourselves from being seen, we also protect the people we love from the chance to rise to the occasion. Shame passes down through families the way furniture does quietly, without anyone deciding to keep it. Understanding where someone's cruelty comes from doesn't mean you have to excuse it, but it does change what you build in its place. Have you ever hidden something you were proud of from someone whose approval you'd stopped expecting? And if that person surprised you, if they finally said, "I know," or "I'm sorry," or simply "I see you," would you know how to let that land? The complicated endings, the ones that don't resolve cleanly,